Hello and welcome to our Afrofuturism panel. My name is Sakshi Kumar and I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at Writers and Books. I am an Asian American woman with brown skin and short black hair. I'm wearing a white t-shirt under a light blue jean jacket. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are recording this panel from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the keeper of the Western Door. As I mentioned, this is our Afrofuturism panel. Afrofuturism is an aesthetic, movement, and cultural framework that offers radical ways of thinking and imagining alternative futures rooted in the now. Afrofuturism is simultaneously past, present, and future. It is an indispensable and urgent tool for dreaming. These writers and scholars will take us through what a reimagined world could look like. Our panelists are Cassandra Scher, Tracie Morris, Nisi Shaw, and Jeffrey Tucker, and our moderator is Adrian Pettinelli. Our panelists and our moderators' books will be available through Writers and Books' indie bookstore, Ampersand Books. I encourage you to read their full bios on our website, wab.org. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here today. I've been really looking forward to this panel. This is a genre or subgenre, depending on how you want to look at it, that I've really been enjoying reading and getting more into, and I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today. My name is Adrian Pettinelli. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman. I am optimistically wearing a sundress today. It is navy blue, the floral pattern. I am wearing glasses because I am a librarian and I have ruined my eyes reading too much. I would like to hand it over to Nisi Shaw. She is going to be our first speaker today. So Nisi, if you would introduce yourself and tell us what you are here to talk about today.
Well, sure. Yeah, I actually use they, them pronouns. My name is Nisi Shaw, and I am a light-skinned African American person with, I'm wearing a striped scarf and a green shirt. You can't really tell, but this is the shirt from World Fantasy, a green t-shirt. And I wanted to start out talking about the definition of what we're talking about. So maybe that's why I get to go first. Afrofuturism, it is a contested term and it's covering contested artistic territory. According to Wikipedia, which is where I start researching, and I don't stay there, but I start there, Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic, philosophy of science, and history that explores the intersection of the African diaspora culture with science and technology. Per scholar Ingrid Lafleur, it's a way of imagining possible futures through a Black cultural lens. So the technology and the time are important in these definitions. The word is original to Mark Derry, as I'm sure most of you know. Mark Derry applied this word Afrofuturism originally to Samuel R. Delany, a well-known science fiction author, a Black science fiction author, and to two other authors. So his definition was speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of 20th century techno culture. There we are again with the techno. And more generally, African American signification that appropriates images of technology and a prosthetically enhanced future. Again with the future. This term is now more broadly applied, not just to authors, but to musicians, to music, to film, to fashion, to all of these different fields of creativity. And in literary usage, I have watched it become diluted to mean any speculative fiction of any type from anyone of African descent. So not just African American, but Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Canadian, as in the case of Nalo Hopkinson for both Caribbean and Canadian, Karen Lord. These are some of the applications. Um, and I am not, for one thing, I don't see anything about African descent in these early definitions. So conceivably, someone could be writing about African American themes and concerns without having genetic heritage of Africa. And then so there's that to question. And then I think about when I write cyberpunk stories, such as The Mighty Finn. When I do that, is that cyberpunk? Is it still cyberpunk? Or because I am of African descent, does that make it Afrofuturism? It's got my concerns in it, so it has African American concerns. It's set in the future, or maybe it's both. Um, and then there's a near future story. Again, I'm using my stuff as an example because I know it best. A near future story called The Water Museum that has African American concerns, but there are no Black characters. None. Everybody in that story is white. And then there are stories set in the past. Here I can depart and use Octavia Butler's Kindred as an example because most of us have read that. That is set primarily in the past. In fact, it's entirely in the past, although the 1970s were not the past when it was written. And then a, a bunch of it takes place in the 1860s and earlier. Okay, so it's in the past. Does that mean that it's not Afrofuturism? Then there are things like Charles Saunders' Imaro series, which are set in imaginary places, in imaginary times. Yeah. So there are a bunch of sort of tiny micro genres that have been subsumed under the term Afrofuturism. And then at the same time, there are competing and related terms. Okay, so there's Afrofuturism, there's African futurism, and African Jujuism, two terms primarily espoused by Nnedi Okorafor. And these attempt to situate the concern not as Afro-American, but as Afro-continental, as stemming from the continent of Africa, although Okorafor herself was born in Ohio. And there are people who are strongly influenced by African concerns that are not defined as African in some ways because they were not born there or because they don't primarily live there. Jeff Ryman's includes this as not just present in or born in African lands, but maybe a generation removed, and maybe that generation is not such a removal, such a stark removal. So yeah, African futurism, African Jujuism, the Black Fantastic, which honestly I have only come across in my encounters with with academia, basically. There's cyberfunk. Cyberfunk is a term invented by two authors, Milton Davis and Balogun Ojetade, who are authors and editors and publishers of this stuff. And they say it's not punk, it's funk. Afropantheology, which is a term that sprang up with the work of Ogunachobwe Donald Ekpeki. And it's very similar to African Jujuism, but not so focused on the African continent. And then, of course, I had to jump in and come up with a term myself, Afro-retrofuturism, which I picked as something really hard to say. Retrofuturism is what some steampunk aficionados call themselves, and you fix Afro onto the beginning of that, and you've got Afro-retrofuturism, or African focused steampunk. And gosh, I think I'm running out of time here for my remarks. Dr. Grace Dillon speaks of indigenous futurisms, widening the field to include Native American and Indian futurisms. And so then you have people chiming in with, well, what about Gulf futurisms, Chicano futurisms, and others? So that is definitely a broadening, but additionally, Dillon explicitly includes Black artists in the concept of indigenous futurisms, because she does not sit well with Black artists' exclusion from indigeneity. And then she also addresses the idea that future needs to be involved in this. I'll quote again from Wikipedia. Time, according to indigenous futurists, encompasses and connects the past, present, and future all at once. This helps us because it sort of undermines the assumption that Afrofuturism must take place in the future. Per Black author Rashida Phillips, time is a lie, and the straightforward trajectory of progress is a lie. So I'm just going to say the contest and the territory of Afrofuturism and related categories, they lend themselves to richness, to myth, to complications and fruitful thoughts, to powerful, challenging, and increasingly involving work. They are living and they are changing. And that is how we know that they are powerful and good, because they grow. That's all I have to say.
Nisi, thank you so much. I'm going to come back with questions about this. As a librarian, I think so much about classification, so I found that really interesting. Thank you so much. Jeff Tucker, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us what you're here to talk about.
Sure. So yes, my name is Jeff Tucker. I identify as African American or Black. I have brown complexion. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm wearing a long-sleeved gray shirt and eyeglasses. So I have a few thoughts about Afrofuturism, its alternative visions and temporalities, and that I will get to by way of addressing the ethics of literature in general and why literature matters, particularly at our current historical moment. And I will try to connect both Afrofuturism and an ethics of literature to this conference's thematic focus on multivocality. So earlier this year, I heard an interview with Ukrainian author Tanya Malyarchuk, whose 2016 novel Forgottenness was recently translated into English. At the end of the interview, Malyarchuk said that she did not believe in literature anymore, that it is an illusion. Given the death and destruction that she has witnessed since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and countless other examples of violence from the Middle East to parts of our own country, I could see her point about how great literary art has failed to convince violent actors to respect our common humanity. However, to an English professor like myself, Malyarchuk's statement felt like a challenge. I had to ask myself on what is my own investment in literature based. Well, I teach and study literature because I believe that, like many art forms, it's a way for readers to have their own experiences affirmed. Moreover, literature provides a way to share the perspective and experiences of those who are different from us. Both are humanizing experiences. This is not a new idea. A Defense of Poetry, an unfinished essay by the 19th century English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, claimed that poetry exercises the imagination, the cognitive faculty that allows us to sympathize with others. The great secret of morals, Shelley wrote, is an identification of ourselves with the beautiful which exists in thought, action, or person not our own. To be greatly good, one must put oneself in the place of another and of many others. The pains and pleasures of one species must become one's own. This principle applies to literature in general, perhaps even to art in general. However, it also seems to be a theme in at least a few works of Afrofuturist writing. Take, for example, Empire Star, the 1962 novel by Samuel R. Delany, one of the first major Black voices in the tradition of science fiction. Like Delany's other works, it is devoted to a vision of multiplexity, to pluralities of being. Empire Star opens with a Proustian epigraph: "The truth is a point of view about things," asserting the importance of multiple perspectives. The novel is the tale of an adventurer named Comet Joe that is told by Jewel, the survivor of a ship that crashes on Joe's home world, and whose dying companion entrusts Joe with the mission of taking a message to Empire Star at the center of the galaxy. Jewel is a crystalline entity described as multicolored, multifaceted, and multiplexed, which makes them a perfect choice to narrate the story, quote, from the point of view called in literary circles the omniscient observer. Later, a character called the Lump, one of Delany's old nicknames, tells Joe that sometimes one must see through someone else's eyes. So he has Joe put Jewel in his eye. The experience is initially painful and disorienting for Joe, who suddenly sees many things from many perspectives simultaneously. However, he realizes that his purpose is to bring to the center of the galaxy the message that the race of slaves who built much of the empire will soon be freed, one of many plot elements that resonate with African American history. At Empire Star, an eclipsing binary star rotating around a single point, the immense gravitational forces create a hole in time and space. Lump explains, only the most multiplex of minds can go there and find their way out again the same way they went in, which is exactly what the characters do. The multiplex reader, Jewel states, has by now discovered that the story is much longer than she thinks, as numerous characters are revealed to be past or future versions of other characters. The sympathetic imagination is also at the thematic heart of Octavia E. Butler's 1993 novel Parable of the Sower. The story's pertinent feature is its protagonist, Lauren Alumna, who experiences an organic delusional syndrome known as hyperempathy. In a literalization of Shelley's Defense of Poetry, Lauren feels other people's pleasure and pain. However, there isn't much pleasure around in the dystopian Southern California in which the novel is set, where employment and natural resources like water are hard to find, and feral dogs and gangs addicted to a drug that makes people want to start fires are not. Lauren describes herself as the most vulnerable person she knows. However, upon finding the mutilated corpse of her brother, she wonders, if hyperempathy syndrome were a more common complaint, people couldn't do such things. They could kill if they had to and bear the pain of it or be destroyed by it. But if everyone could feel everyone else's pain, who would torture? Who would cause anyone unnecessary pain? It might not be so bad a thing, she concludes, if most people had to endure all the pain they caused. As Delaney's Empire Star suggests, point of view is a fundamental element of narrative storytelling. Henry James wrote that the house of fiction has in short not one window, but a million. However, American literature has often been selective about the windows through which it views the world. As demonstrated by Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark and the scholarship inspired by it, many canonical works tie themselves into syntactic knots because they avoid or are oblivious to the perspectives of people of color. There is therefore a politics to a work's narrative approaches, which is why the deployment of an omniscient point of view matters in a work like N.K. Jemison's The City We Became, Writers and Books 2023 choice for its Rochester Reads event. The superpowered avatars of the boroughs of New York City, who are battling an extra-dimensional threat, represent diversity in a variety of categories: race, gender, sexuality, generation, socioeconomic class. And I believe that Jemison purposefully tells the story from the point of view of each of these characters, even the white girl from Staten Island who succumbs to her fears of people who look different from her, a trait that is not to be emulated, but is also all too human. Malyarchuk's diminished faith in literature is also a matter of temporality. Quote, literature is something that you are writing afterwards all the time, afterwards about the tragedies, when they've been, as her interlocutor explains, already perpetrated, when they've already happened, when nobody stopped them. There is truth to this claim, of course, but the future-oriented aspect of many works of science fiction suggests something that John Gardner said in his admittedly controversial 1978 book on moral fiction. Quote, true art is moral because it clarifies life, establishes models of human action, casts nets toward the future. It designs visions worth trying to make fact. This is why, perhaps in The Necessity of Tomorrows, a 1978 address to the Studio Museum in Harlem, Delaney said, we need images of tomorrow, and our people need them more than most. In Butler's Parable of the Sower, Lauren creates a religion she calls Earthseed, the destiny of which, she writes, is to take root among the stars. Earthseed provides, therefore, a unifying, purposeful life here on Earth and the hope of heaven, a real heaven, not mythology or philosophy, a heaven that will be humanity's to shape. Jemison's 2018 story, The Ones Who Stay and Fight, encourages the reader, quote, to envision a world where people have learned to love, as they learned in our world to hate, to describe the story's post-colonial utopia to others and spread the notion farther still. And it closes by telling the reader, let's get to work, i.e., at making that world a reality. Visions of the future alone may be insufficient to create a just and humane world, but we cannot create such a world without them. Another reason why Afrofuturism matters so much, especially at the present. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Every time I hear you speak, I jot down things you reference that I want to go read. Actually, The Ones Who Stay and Fight, you mentioned the last time I saw you speak, and I read it, and what a great little story that is. I enjoyed that. We're going to come back to your topic too. I love this. All right, now Cassandra Scher, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself and speak your piece.
Okay, thank you. My name is Cassandra Scher. I am an African-American woman with brown skin, long dreadlocks that vary from blonde to brown, and I'm wearing a striped blazer that's sort of rainbow colored. My pronouns are she, her. So if I had a working title for this talk, it would be Black Futurists Unite, which should give you an idea of what I'm going to discuss today. But I would like to frame this talk by sharing a quote by Walida Imarisha. This quote comes from a work called Octavia's Brood. It's a collection of essays and stories inspired by Octavia Butler's work, which, of course, her work is life-changing. But also thinking about it from the perspective of organizers and activists. So what Imarisha tells us is, whenever we envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we are engaging in speculative fiction. All organizing is science fiction. Organizers and activists dedicate their lives to creating and envisioning another world or many other worlds. So, what better venue for organizers to explore their work than science fiction stories? Now, what I would like to add to that in this talk today is thinking about this from the point of view of Afrofuturism and activism. And so, what I would add is whenever we envision these kinder, gentler, more equitable worlds, as part of the Black imagination, the Black imaginary, we are engaging in Afrofuturism. When we, as members of a or many Black diasporas or allies and friends of Black communities, imagine places we are attempting to build when we are engaging in Afrofuturism. When James Baldwin penned his letter to his nephew in the hopes of guiding both that particular child, but also generations of Black youth and us today, to imagine themselves as something more than what racist people would scream about them and say about them. He wasn't asking that nephew, those young people, to engage in an Afrofuturistic project. And when slaves would tell each other folk tales about Black people who could fly, or men named John who were clever enough and charming enough to trick the devil, they were engaging in Afrofuturism. Part of what both fascinates and excites me about Afrofuturism is that it is a genre of work that inherently moves us beyond the page or the song or the canvas or the fashion show or enter your favorite media type here. We're not just telling each other stories when we engage in Afrofuturism. We are inventing new tools and creating roadmaps to potential futures. When we say something like Black Lives Matter, or when Martin Luther King Jr. tells us about his dream, we and he are not just indicating that there's something unacceptable about the here and now, although that is an important part of activism. We are also signaling that there's something better in the future. There can be something better in the future. We are challenging each other to imagine what that future could look like. We are asking each other to create places to run to and not just point out spaces to run from. Because social change cannot just focus on pain and horror. Yes, those moments of pain, suffering, horror, etc., they can become a catalyst to a moment, a change, an energy. One only need to look at the example of George Floyd's murder to understand and see that. But what is also clear is that horror isn't sustainable. These tragedies happen, we build up a lot of energy, we build up a lot of like protests, we get really going with our movement, but then that energy dies down. Then those protests die down. They don't stop, but they just don't maintain the same energy. Horror isn't sustainable. One eventually adapts to or starts to even forget about the pain. You can't create true and sustainable change without a future or an ideal to run to. But in a situation where you've never experienced that ideal, you don't actually know in real life what it looks like, you need Afrofuturism to know what it could and eventually should look like. This is exciting to me as a creative, as a scholar, and particularly as a teacher, because it helps me not only reassure those around me that it can get better, but Afrofuturism gives me actual tools and strategies to use or teach that help us take these steps towards changing our imagined worlds into our reality. Nigerian author Akwaeke Emezi often discusses not feeling comfortable in the physical spaces they find themselves in. And their solution for this is to create imagined worlds where they will feel comfortable, those kinder, gentler worlds. To give these worlds life in their work and share that work with all of us. That in itself is amazing and is an amazing Afrofuturistic project. But what excites me most is the way that my students respond to work such as that. The way they use Akwaeke's work or Mezi's work to imagine tangible changes that they can take on in their lives and that they can create on campus. How they start to embrace Emezi and other Afrofuturist language to speak to each other, to help each other, and to change their worldviews, to even start to make little changes at a time. Yeah, it's a little bit of a time, but it's change. Afrofuturism is a needed tool of activism. I find the places it provides these work, the places provided by these works are necessary for creating a safe and sustainable future for myself and my communities. Part of Afrofuturism is very by its very nature is that it is and always has been a necessary part of creating futures that we need and deserve. So those are my comments, and I'm excited to hear what comes next.
Cassandra, thank you so much. That quote at the beginning that you read, I have got to get that because I feel that that just encapsulated thoughts in my head that I had never articulated before. I love too how well you all, everybody planned their remarks separately, but you all are dovetailing into one another so beautifully. It's I just love this. Thank you. Tracie Morris, our last speaker, would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you're here to talk about?
Hi, I'm Tracie. I'm an African-American woman, medium to light brown, depending on who you ask. Black person from Brooklyn, New York. I'm wearing like reddish pink maroon lipstick. I have my hair, most of my hair wrapped, and the other part is in a bun of dreadlocks behind me in the back. I'm wearing a gray dress with a black round collar. And I'm in a white room on a beige couch. I'm also wearing glasses. This area that I'm in, I believe, was cultivated by the Canarsie people before colonialism. I'm going to talk. It's really a generative panel. I'm very honored and happy to be part of this panel. I want to offer what I hope is a bit of a contribution to the idea of Afrofuturism in arts and letters, namely the formulation of language as poetics in a futurist way, a critical element of Black negotiation with text, texture, and context. My brief comments are a way to get the ball rolling in this kind of conversation, and I look forward to further discussions and insights from my collaborators and panelist colleagues here. My background and as an artist is as a theorist, and as a creative and as a theorist is in the performativity of language, how it performs as a meaning maker, and how it offers notions of performance for the utterer. In majoritarian languages like English, French, and Spanish, we have already managed a type of futurism. I hasten to add, however, that our sensibility about futurism is nonlinear in AAVE, for example, and that this reframing of time in the poetics of language works in multiple ways, including sonically and on the page. So I want to prompt us by thinking about space-time dimensionally, as we should. One example of this conflation of space-time on the page in poetry is, for example, the first line of Yusuf Komunyaka's famous poem, Facing It, where he talks about being in front of Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial as a former member of the military during that war. Yusuf's first line is, "My black face fades, hiding inside the black granite." In this line, he expands the page into a three-dimensional object in which he is like he is in front of Maya Deren's sculpture, both in it and outside of it. It's a type of irreconcilability that is also formulated by the literal tonal proximity between Yusuf's complexion and the color of the dark memorial stone. Oftentimes, this kind of color proximity was used euphemistically, negatively, because the idea of literal darkness is seen as evil. By some. This conception was reclaimed about 70 years ago with the Black Power movement, that itself a rejection of colored and a less pointed directed relationship with deep color. My black face fades in the black granite, to paraphrase, is not only a shifting of tone and a harbinger of the deaths he recalls in the poem by looking at the memorial, but also speaks to the future that he experiences as he looks at the stone as a survivor and the witness of the 58,022 names that are in letters like smoke. Smoke also being an old derogatory euphemism for Blackness, irrespective of the color of the Black person. I want to just make sure I should have asked if you guys could hear me okay before I went into my thing. I assume you can hear me okay, because I don't see any notes. So I'll just keep going. So yeah, it doesn't matter what the color of the Black person is. This euphemism of smoke has been used. People see what they want to see, what they interpret, and here Yusuf is unabashedly identifying Blackness and deep colored Blackness with meaning in a space-time way to see into Blackness. We also see visual representations with this interdimensional Blackness within the work of, say, Kerry James Marshall, who uses deep Black hues to look into, not just glance past, as unknowable total occlusion of Blackness, but to see Blackness multidimensionally. Imagery is working for both of these artists in the same conceptual way, reframing sight and meaning dimensionally. But I want to go back to how we come to understand Afrofuturity in poetry as sound. For those of us who are descendants of enslaved people in this hemisphere, we experienced a relationship with majoritarian language and made it more strikingly poetic. And it's not just exclusively us, but I'm just focusing on that right now. As most groups who become dominated do, as linguists know better than I, we first experienced English, Spanish, French, Portuguese as unknowable, and then with utilitarian horror of meaning in the way that the mind has a heightened understanding of language immersion. In our case, it was a profound understanding based on reconciling unspeakable horror, being sold from loved ones, psychologically, spiritually, and physically abused, maimed, raped, and murdered. This harsh language reality was, for example, highlighted in the first iteration of the television show Roots, when the primary character, Kunta Kinte, had to reject his own name, the most intimate relationship with words that we tend to have, to adopt the slave master named Toby. This vocabulaic rendering of garments under punishment of being whipped to death and to traumatize the community that witnessed it was as effective as the reformulation of entertainment highlighted by Foucault in Discipline and Punish. What does this vocabulaic utterance do to the mind of someone with radically different language groups and references, much less overall cultural references? And how is this negotiated poetically? Another example of this reconfiguration of majoritarian language, shifting it to a futurist nonlinear space-time reality, is the relationship during slavery times with the Bible. Used coercively against Africans and later African Americans in their diaspora during slavery times, as well as continental Africans who stayed on the continent, to accept our lot as children of Ham as we fought for and obtained literacy, again, despite being threatened with death for learning to read. We reconfigured the redacted meaning, the erasure creating Bible justifications for slavery into liberatory text, making metaphor of our position with those biblical stories, putting ourselves through space-time and other places and dimensions. Those of us who were oppressed as we mastered their word of God. The Bible became, for us, a grimoire of interdimensional warfare, and it is no surprise that Octavia Butler was able to harness this framing in Kindred. It was a known understanding, as it was for Harriet Tubman. However, in these few brief remarks, I must mention how AAVE draws primarily on the oral traditions of Africa and African-American hybridity, itself a futurist concept. Both vocabulaically, conceptually, and orally, we have refashioned language itself in a poetic way. We see this in the embedded African-based rhythms in AAVE, also known as Ebonics, often stereotyped, and most certainly in the evolution of hip hop from end rhyme scheme to internal rhyme scheme, reflecting the intuitions of modern Black music, prompted from field hollers to blues to jazz. One of its most noteworthy innovators, Rakim, formerly of Eric B. and Rakim, and now recently of Eric B. and Rakim, emphasizes the internal rhyme as jazz. Rakim was a saxophonist before becoming a rapper, and the intricacies of innovative jazz reconfigured English in a way that propelled hip hop out of the novelty recordings of, say, rappers alike. This futuristic poetic sensibility continues to reverberate in the works of artists like Missy Elliott, Nicki Minaj, Lizzo, MC Lyte, and Kendrick Lamar, with a song reframing the TV show Roots character as King Kunta. this influence would also affect slam poetry and begin to embed its influence into conventional poetry in the new century, as I've often seen in the work of my students at the Iowa Writers Workshop. So thanks. I look forward to further discussions.
Tracie, thank you. I love how you embedded your remarks in just the whole wide range of arts. I just, that was a lot. I'm definitely gonna be taking, I took a lot of notes, but I'm watching this again so I can take a few more. That was great. So let me ask all of our panelists to come back, and I prepared some questions, and I have some more as I've listened to your remarks, and I encourage any of you to jump in with questions. But as promised, I want to go back to Nisi's topic about just what this genre is, and I'm curious from the other panelists how you feel about genre labels. This is somewhat selfish. I'm a librarian, so I think a lot about classification and how we present books in the library, particularly, but just in general, labels can be such a great way to find things, but they can also limit. And I'm curious from you all what you think, just in my own work. Does anybody have a thought out there? Jeff?
Well, I feel, of course.
Oh, sorry.
It sounds like poetry. I mean, I don't know about the labels for the librarians, but I'm team library, always team library. But what Nisi was saying is they sound like they were speaking a poetic language. So I guess the idea of labeling to me is not as interesting as the new configurations of language. In some ways that serves as a labeling. In some ways, I think it has nothing to do with labels. It's people continuing to adapt a language that was placed upon people into something new that works for them.
Yeah, Jeff, what were you gonna chime in?
No, I completely agree with what Tracie just said. And I guess I would also just add that there's this proliferation of names that Nisi described, which I think is actually it's a creative act, and it's interesting because I do think of Afrofuturism as a movement, but it's interesting that like a lot of literary movements get their names ex post facto. The British Romantics were not sitting around calling themselves the British Romantics. That was a term that was applied afterward, and so. But I do think Afrofuturism and these other names are getting at something that's happening now and is meaningful now. And I would also say is that I think it's important to respect this kind of multiplicity of names, because I think just in general it's important to acknowledge and respect how people want to be referred to and how they want to refer to themselves, and that's important. So especially artists, writers, and creatives. So I think it's important to honor how they identify, regardless of what the label is.
Nisi.
I just want to agree also that it's the multiplicity of names it's some ways it's a contradiction, but it's also a complementing. It also these names shore each other up. They're all saying, yes, there is something to look at here. I will just add, I've been thinking about this all morning. I worked at a bookstore called Borders, which was, I worked at Store One, and that was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The existence of a Black fiction section was troubling to many people there. And one of the things that I learned was that the section came about because it was a demand of a group of activists who sat in and basically they took over the administration building of the university in Ann Arbor. So it's people are like, well, you're ghettoizing this. but it's also, it comes out of this movement to call it up, to highlight it. So I would say the same for all these different versions.
It's I liked what Cassandra had to say and about this being a movement and activism that resonated with me. Cassandra, what else?
So I hate that I'm coming at my own field a little bit in this regard, but like I also like when we talking about labels, um, I I want us to also think about and be careful about like why are we labeling something? Because as part of a movement and part of like creative aspects and wanting to call something up, love that. And so in that regard, I agree. But also at the same time, academia tends to try to label things to then take control of it. So like feminism becomes women and gender studies departments, and so now you can like give it a administration and you can give it a sort of system to play into. And so I do at times love labels because they help you find things in libraries. I love being able to name things as a part of a creative act and as a part of an activist act, but I'm also aware of when those tools start to get turned back around, if that makes sense, and when they become something that the system starts to adopt and like wrap up into itself in order to not help the movement but to like normalize the movement and make the movement comfortable. So I think about what was said about borders in the library, and in some ways that was a very activist act. But now that you have like a section in the library, people can go, "We did it, guys," and then like move on. And so I wonder and question those moments of when labels are actually helping us move forward and when they're actually being utilized to help us or force us to slow down. Just some thoughts that I want to throw out.
Yeah, this is reminding me. I had to peek to remember the name of the film, even though it was so recent. American Fiction. When the did you all see that when the author came and took his books in the bookstore and attempted to move them? And I feel that sometimes even walking around the library when I see how we've classed things, and I think like this place where it is it's getting hidden, and I want to pull it to another spot. A way I've handled that is sometimes we have these sections and I'll put things in multiple sections by multiple copies, but it's a tough thing. People want to be able to find things, but then also, yeah, you don't want to control it. You don't want to box it in. To me, especially in speculative fiction, the most amazing thing about it is that it's inventing, that it's exploring new ways of looking at things in such a big way. So I've always preferred speculative fiction, for instance, to sci-fi and fantasy, because where's that line even, So I love, thank you for indulging me to talk about that. I'm curious.
It's just Adrienne,
Yeah,
one other
sorry,
thing, something that Cassandra said that made me think about Afrofuturism. It's also a marketing tool. So that's something to think about as well. It's something that publishers are using to sell books. So that's just something we have to keep in mind as well.
Yes. Yes, a valuable thing, but then also a double-edged sword, right? um, a question I have for you, and we've heard of a few kind of historical examples that you all have brought up of books in this genre. I'm mindful that a lot of folks who would be watching this are going to probably want to dig into classic examples. So I wondered if you all had any others to share, how to go back and maybe see how this is coming into to the literature. Oh, here, Nisi, what do you have there?
Sorry, this is I'm showing off again. This is a list from the Detroit Public Library. Every year they publish African American book list, And this year they had me do an essay about it, called We Are Not Invisible, where I list a bunch of titles that people can read that are, I would call, classics of Black speculative fiction, including some new stuff, but some older stuff, such as you were mentioning the Comet when we were exchanging emails, the Comet by W.E.B. Du Bois. There are even older works, and then there are plays and poems. I put together a list called A Crash Course in the History of Black Science Fiction. That is available on my website. I guess I could put a link in the chat. But yeah, and then I did a bunch of essays on each title. So like there was a Lorraine Hansberry play that was speculative fiction, Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, all of these wonderful things. Let's not forget that they're behind us, because they are also beneath us and holding us up as we do this work.
Yeah, I read the comment after Jeff mentioned it. As I say, I just always get a reading list from him. And I was, stunned, as I always am with, kind of classic works, how fresh that is. Like, it could have been written the other day. You know what I mean? I love digging back into those things. Did anybody else have any things they'd like to highlight?
So I know probably she doesn't traditionally fall into this conversation, but I would really encourage people to engage or maybe re-engage in Zora Neale Hurston's work, particularly some of her anthropology work, the work that she's, some of the work that she really wanted to do, but didn't get to do as much when she was alive, or didn't get for many good reasons, weren't published as much when she was alive. Like, So Tell My Horse, but like I'm thinking of like the classic folklore, and those stories, because this is what I mean when I say things like Afrofuturism has always been a part of this conversation. We just didn't apply that label. But when you look at African American folklore, African folklore, like these stories that we tell each other when we're trying to imagine our better futures or entertain each other, that becomes a really genitive aspect of Afrofuturism. So if you're looking to do a little bit of historical work, that's where I would start people.
I love that. Tracie, I saw you.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting what both Cassandra and Jeff, as well as Nisi, is saying about marketing. Because see, I emerged with this spoken word as a phrase, which doesn't mean anything but talking, but it was a way in not saying poetry. And I just paused, Nisi, when you said Afro Jujuism. I'm like, you don't have to put an Afro in front of Juju. Like how was that? Like, you don't need to market that. And it just makes me think about like some of the questions we're having about organizing ideas so that they're not disappeared in a way that's different from labeling, is the Afrocentrality of some of these ideas, because it's always, that's where the disappearing happens. It's like, there's a different kind of way in which bigotry operates across marginalized people. And sometimes it's like, pretend you don't exist. And then it's like, well, just take over and act like you didn't make it. And so when we have to qualify a word like juju by saying Afro-Jujuism, it's like nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying the standard is African and African American. So this standardization is a really important question, because what I was saying about some of my students, that wasn't just Black students who are influenced by hip hop. Hip hop has changed how people sound, how people hear, period, like globally. And so the centrality of our meaningfulness as a global people, and how we have just shifted paradigms from like being people, Homo sapiens sapiens, to like the future. It's just important to note, because we have to fight against the notion of marginalism, because that will get us killed. And it has. And it's like, what's a long time ago gave a talk, what's African about American poetry? And I just gave a whole list of different language groups that was like affected what is considered mainstream American. And I think that's a global question. So this is some of the questions that we're asking about what's the future. It's like, what's the ground? It's like what Nisi was saying about what lifts us up. It's all of us that are lifted up. So anyway, I didn't mean to go into a whole screed, but I just Afro Juju has really kind of like made me want to laugh. I'm like, the default of Juju is whatever it means is African, right?
It is actually African Jujuism, just not Afro. Just watch, hit the floor.
Oh, that's more that really. I'm sorry. That's like underlining the point. Like you're saying African Juju. I'm like, I mean, it's an interesting term because it did carry over across the Atlantic, but the language group of that is African. You know, it's so anyway, thank you for the clarification, but I just was like, wow. You know, there's a prefix to everything.
Yeah. I think, you know, I just wonder if it is somewhat educational for folks who maybe don't know better, you know, and which sometimes that's what happens. Jeff, did you have any other examples of, you know, kind of classics that people might not already have on their radar?
Yeah, well, something that comes to mind is a somewhat contrarian example. That would be the work of George S. Schuyler, who is probably like the most conservative Black man in American history. But a really fascinating writer. And there's his 1931 novel, Black No More, which is about uh, a, a scientific process that turns Black people into white people. And but it's also more of a satire on the notion of race and of anti-Black racism. It's very critical of white supremacy. And it was actually adapted into an off-Broadway musical a few years ago with Tariq Trotter, Black Thought from The Roots was involved in that. And then Schuyler also wrote a serialized story that was published in the Pittsburgh Courier, important Black newspaper at the time. That was collected into a volume entitled Black Empire, which is about basically the sort of Black super genius who has a plan and design to basically take over the world. And but it also shows how Schuyler is very much in dialogue with the pulp fiction, pulp science fiction of that era. The organization that Dr. Belsidus is his name, the character's name, that he runs. They have like underground airplane hangars, and they also they use hydroponics, which was a very new thing in the 30s. And all of this state of the art technology, and also futuristic technology, like he has a death ray, like every science fiction villain of that era has to have a death ray, right? So it's fascinating stuff. It's very entertaining. Again, I mean, Schuyler's politics, which is a whole other topic, is extremely retrograde, but his writing, particularly his kind of science fiction-y writing, is really fascinating and very entertaining.
Thanks. I have not heard of him. So once again, you've added to my reading list. To kind of pull to the contemporary, and I don't know how many of you are reading these Tor novellas that have been coming out over the last bunch of years. I'm thinking of Binti, I'm thinking of Riot Baby, I'm thinking of The Deep. I'm curious I am just loving what Tor is doing with novellas. And I feel like they have gone into this Afrofuturism space pretty heavily. I feel like this is where they're taking swings in a lot of ways. I mean, Riot Baby particularly is one of the most powerful books I've read probably in the last decade. I don't know if any of you have read it, but I found it stunning. So I'm just curious. I'm always trying to get people to read these basically. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on them, if any of you have them. I think I saw Nisi raise a hand.
I did read Riot Baby, and I do adore it. Adore it. The one that really grabbed my heart and still has not let go, though, is Kai Ashanti Wilson. He actually wrote two novellas for Tor.com. One was called A Taste of Honey, and the other was called A Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps. And both of them superficially read as fantasy, and then you read them and they're great examples of that Arthur C. Clarke saying, any sufficiently advanced technology appears to be magic. But one of the great things, and I think you'll appreciate this, Tracie, one of the great things that Kai does is he makes all of the AAV speaking people the nobles, and all of the people who speak proper English the peasants. He flips that economic thing on its head. So many things. My friend Bill Campbell said, well, if Kai Ashanti Wilson was any further up your street, they'd be calling it Nisi Shaw Way. Because he does it, and he does it with beautiful language and very purposeful language.
I haven't read those ones yet. I'm definitely going to have to. Tracie, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Nisi, for that comment. And yeah, that sounds super exciting. And I appreciate what you were saying, Adrienne, about like sort of moving the books around, because I think part of the trap is making us feel like we're in these like mutually exclusive territories, and that's bull crap. There's not, and that's one of the points American fiction was making, But I'll also say, I feel like how we talked about text also needs to be expanded and changed in terms of dimension. So, like, since the person recently passed, like Faith Ringgold, to me is a writer. Like, I mean, all of the work is writing because I'm biased towards my discipline, but it's like it's all text to be analyzed. So the quilts of G's Ben, the quilting of Africans in India as part of the Eastern enslavement trade, the quilting of the American South. These are texts to be read. And I think thinking about the way that Black people and all marginalized people have negotiated what it means to read into something, including stories passed down in all these different ways. If they're all seen as text, if they all perform as text, it does something different to the way we understand their value because of the way that we look at literature. So there are books about this stuff, but what if we all, I mean, many people here already do this, but what if we all saw these things as textual meaning and multidimensional textual meaning? That's what I'm trying to develop my discipline towards as a poet. I call everything poetry, but I work in music and film and all of these other stuff. And I think a lot of people do that. They just create these different categories. I'll just say one little thing about that before I stop. I worked with some African drummers from the continent. And for them, being a drummer means you find the right tree, you hollow the tree out, you use a goat skin, you clean the goat skin, you cure it, you tone it, you play it, you know the songs for it, and then you can dance to it. That's a drummer, period. So it's like not hyper compartmentalized. And understand, being an academic, why people have specialties. But I'm just saying, to them, that's what being a drummer is. For us, for me, all of these things read as text. So the books that talk about Faith Ringgold are an aspect of understanding her textual analysis and understanding, which is also futuristic. So I don't know if that helps librarian Dewey catalogs. I don't know if it helps, but I hope that it's a way of thinking about futurity in an expansive, multidimensional way, as you all have been making me think today.
Yes, Cassandra.
So to build off of that, and then to get and kind of connect it to your question about Tor, I love the work that they do. Like, if you want it does feel like that is a space where they're pushing their envelope. That like, where are you going to get some more of this more experimental literature where you're going to start to see some of this work be done? And so in that regard, wow, perfect, love it. At the same time, to kind of to get sort of back and sort of use what Tracie just said. At the same time, and this gets to something that Jeff said as well, I recognize what they're doing there is testing on whether or not we can make this sort of thing marketable, and whether or not the sort of holistic, beautiful things that start to happen in other places that can't have not can't are harder to create in publishing and academia, even in the classroom, if that can become something that can be brought into those spaces. And so the story about the drummer and what drumming is beautiful. That is where I would say that you really experience literature in its like full sense of like, this is how a story is fully created. A lot of the work that we start to see being done with like podcasting and other ways where you can start to get your voice out in a more free manner. I'll say that with quotation marks because I understand that microphones and all those things cost money, that there's the barrier. But the more sort of avant-garde or amazing artistic work that we're seeing in these other spaces. So on one hand, love what Tor's doing. On the other hand, I recognize this is also this sort of like, okay, so how do we make something we know that people like into a thing that we can then make money off of? And I don't want to say that like it's completely a bad thing, because people got to eat, people got to pay their rent, people have to pay their overhead. These offices and lovely spaces we're all hanging out in, money went into creating them. And so that is a reality. Yet at the same time, I always am suspicious once capitalism starts to get involved and movements and creativity and artistic works. And again, I say that as an academic who understands that I am applying in many ways how do you professionalizing these things that I wanted to do creatively when I was young, but then realized, oh, but I still got to pay my rent. So what am I going to do? So I recognize that I am part of this system, but I'm also poking at the system.
Jeff, do you have something to add?
Just that I like the novella format a lot. You know, often people will ask me for like recommendations, about a certain author, and my response is usually to get a collection of their short fiction, because short stories are short, and there's not the same type of investment of time and attention that there would be with regard to a novel. But a novella is sort of like the best of both worlds. It's like short. It's not, but I mean, but it's also an extended aesthetic kind of vision, throughout a work. So it's not as long as a novel, but not as short as short story. So I really like that kind of focus on that particular type of writing. And I just want to say that River Solomon's the Deep is, I think, having a moment, at least in academia. It's like I know a lot of people who are doing research and writing stuff on the Deep, and that's partly because it's just a really very rich text and it's a very rich idea. So, but I also think River Solomon is also developing a recognizable writerly voice that's kind of exciting to see as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I co-sign, on a lot of what you all said here in terms of, like when I first read Binti, for instance, which clearly was envisioned as a novel and broken, I think, into that's how I read it. That I think that author had a novel, and they said, well, we'll do this novella, and why don't we get the novel? That clearly was good. In my opinion, but then I'm so grateful we had it. And I enjoyed reading them one at a time as they were coming out. But as a librarian, it's so odd to me. A lot of people don't want to read a novella. I don't know why, if they view it as less than because it's shorter or something. I don't know. I have a hard time talking people into short stories too, even though I love them. So I just I truly want everybody to read everything. That's how you wind up as a librarian. I personally wish to read everything, and I also want everybody else to do the same thing. So, and I don't know, and I probably should have gotten a little feedback ahead of time. I'm curious if any of you have recommendations for young people. I'm mindful of this idea of, you know, certainly mirrors and sliding glass doors and windows, as we say in the youth world for kids, and how important that is, but also this idea of envisioning future that this genre brings that's so is important for everybody, but who is it more important for than young people? So I'm curious if you have any authors you would point kids or teens to particularly. Yes.
I have my students in my college classes read this as well, but I recommend this book highly for younger audiences. Akwaeke Emezi's Pet. It is a lovely handling of what a utopic society could look like what tangibly it could look like. It handles its main character Jam's identity and her movement through the world well. I'll go ahead and like spoil this aspect right away. Jam is transgender, and it's one of the more beautiful handling of like a transgender identity that I've seen, because no one makes a big deal. Jam announces it when she's young, and her parents just go, "Oh, we're so sorry, girl. We did not know." And they just move on. They just move forward. And so it's just a beautiful handling of how, not just a wonderful story and adventure story, but a wonderful handling of how to treat people and treat each other with respect, and how to demand respect for yourself. And so like that is a work that, like, not a mother, but if I were, I would force my kids to read it. So
Thank you. That's one I've heard of and I haven't read yet. So I got to ratchet that up on the list. Tracie, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful work being done by Daniel Jose Older. A lot of his series are really great. They're young adult and very, very innovative and rethinking a lot of the things that we talked about. I couldn't just pick one. The Shadow Shaper series, and he also has like comic books and other things. So yeah, I highly recommend Daniel Jose Older's work.
Well, I love a comic book too, and that's great for you know, obviously the speculative space. Nisi, yes.
Well, I was just gonna say, sorry, Tracie, but Daniel's not Black. He's
Well, yeah. Well, interestingly, I'm going back to what you said.
yes.
I'm going back to what you said. And
Yeah.
also, I think that I don't know if Daniel Jose Older, how he affiliates himself besides Latino, but he definitely frames Black characters and the Black aesthetic and Black culture in the work as a Latino. So
Yeah.
but I'm going back to what you said.
Thank you.
I mentioned it. But yeah, it's good to frame to contextualize this conversation in a bigger way.
And I do have a couple of recommendations for middle grade. Ruby Findley versus the the interstellar invasion. Excuse me. That's by K. Tempest Bradford. And it's about a little girl who finds a bug in her backyard. She's like a hardcore entomologist, and then she finds this bug that is actually an alien. So yeah. And then my middle grade novel, Speculation, which, you know, okay, it's historical fantasy, right? So is it Afrofuturism again, right? Whatever. And then finally, now what is that? The title of that one by Justina Ireland, Dread Nation. Yeah, that is an alternate history YA novel in which African peoples and their descendants are trained as zombie killers. Yeah, that one's good. So one of each, and like, are they Afrofuturism? They're not set in the future.
I like your is it Afrofuturism? Whatever. I do think we all can agree. we can use this label widely.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you have any?
So I really have not read a lot of YA stuff, period, but I am the father of a teenage daughter, and she, I know she really likes, you mentioned Nydia Okorafor's works, and so she's a big fan of Okorafor Binti works, and she's also a fan, she really liked Tome Adieme's Children of Blood and Bone. She liked that a lot. So those are recommendations from a teenager by way of her dad.
We can't really do better than recommendations directly from the teenagers for the teenagers, because the teenagers do not care what we have to say, in my experience. So that's perfect. Thank you. I'm sure folks who watch this might want to be putting some books near at least kids and hoping that they read them. Well, I can't believe our time is up already, but it is. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to prepare your remarks and to be here today and engage in this conversation. I know I learned a lot. I think the folks who watch this will too, and I hope to talk to you all again to get more great knowledge and recommendations someday.
I want to echo that. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey, Tracie, Nisi, Cassandra, and Adrian. Thank you for being here today and for sharing so much of your work and your thinking with us. It's been such an honor being in this space with you all. As a reminder, the books of our panelists and our moderator are available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books, and I encourage you to support them in any way that you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.